I never thought I'd be writing something like this. Honestly, I always thought these kinds of stories were things that happened to other people, not me. I've spent most of my life thinking I had everything figured out. Steady job, great wife, a future full of promise. But sometimes, life has a way of flipping everything upside down when you least expect it. And when it happens, it doesn't just knock you off balance. It completely shatters everything you thought you knew. It all started on a seemingly ordinary Saturday. My wife, Lauren, and I had just celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary a few weeks prior. The day had been perfect, dinner at our favorite spot, reminiscing about all the good memories we'd created over the years, and making plans for the future. If you'd asked me then, I would have told you we were solid. That, despite the usual bumps that come with a long relationship, we were stronger than ever. That Saturday, we were supposed to spend the afternoon together, just the two of us. But Lauren seemed distracted. She had been acting a little off lately. Nothing too dramatic, just small things. Like when we were out at dinner or watching TV at night, she'd be glued to her phone. When I asked about it, she'd brush it off, saying it was work or that one of her friends was going through something and needed advice. I didn't think much of it at first. I trusted her. We had built a life together after all. By mid-morning, she told me she needed to run some errands and that she'd be gone for a couple of hours. I didn't question it. Why would I? Instead, I told her I'd get things ready for a barbecue that evening. Just a simple evening with a few friends in the backyard, enjoying the last of the summer weather. I could tell she wasn't too keen on it, but she agreed and left the house in a bit of a hurry. I figured she was just stressed, or maybe she needed some alone time to unwind. As she drove away, I stood in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, watching the dust particles swirl in the sunlight streaming through the window. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but there was a nagging feeling I couldn't shake. It was one of those gut instincts that tells you something isn't quite right, but you can't put your finger on it. I brushed it off and went about my day, prepping for the evening, cleaning the grill, and picking up some extra supplies from the store. When Lauren finally got back, something was different. Her mood had shifted. She seemed tense, distracted even more than usual. I asked her how her errands went, and she gave me a half-hearted answer before retreating to the bedroom to change. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I didn't know what was going on in her head. That evening, our friends arrived, and the barbecue went off without a hitch. If anything, it was a great distraction. We laughed, we drank, we reminisced about old times. Lauren seemed to ease up a bit, but I noticed that she was drinking more than usual. Every time I glanced over at her, she had a new drink in her hand, and I couldn't help but wonder if something deeper was bothering her. But again, I didn't press it. I figured if she wanted to talk, she would. By the time the night ended, and the last of our friends had left, Lauren was well past tipsy. She slurred something about heading to bed, and I followed behind, helping her up the stairs. As we lay in bed, her back turned to me, I stared at the ceiling, that uneasy feeling creeping back into my mind. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I convinced myself that things would get better. Over the next few weeks, that same tension lingered between us. It was subtle at first. Lauren going out more often, staying out later, her phone buzzing more frequently with messages she seemed reluctant to share. But life kept moving. Work kept me busy, and we'd still have our good moments. I guess I didn't want to believe anything could be seriously wrong. One evening, as we sat on the couch, her phone buzzed again. This time, she quickly grabbed it and put it face down on the coffee table. That was the moment when doubt truly started to creep in. I knew something was wrong, but I still couldn't imagine what it was. Was she unhappy with me? Were we drifting apart? The thought of her being unfaithful hadn't even crossed my mind yet. I trusted her too much for that. But that night, something changed. I couldn't ignore the nagging doubts any longer. As she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had happened to the woman I married. Why had she become so distant? I decided I needed to find out. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone while she was in the shower. What I found wasn't what I expected. It wasn't texts from another man. No flirty messages or confessions of love. Instead, It was a string of vague conversations with someone I didn't recognize about plans, about meeting up. The messages weren't incriminating on their own, but there was a coldness to them, a detachment that didn't sit right with me. They weren't the kind of messages you'd send to just a friend. I couldn't help but wonder, who was this person, and why hadn't Lauren mentioned them before? It wasn't until later that I would find out the truth. And let me tell you, Reddit, it was far worse than anything I could have imagined. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and second-guessing. I tried to act like nothing was wrong, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I couldn't shake the thought of those vague messages and the shift in Lauren's behavior. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but I didn't have enough proof. And honestly, I was scared of what I might find if I kept digging. Instead, I decided to be patient. I needed more information before I jumped to conclusions. I started paying closer attention to her comings and goings, tracking her schedule in my head. Every time she said she was going out with friends or had work to do, I made a mental note of how long she was gone, who she said she was with, and what time she got home. At first, everything seemed normal, but then small inconsistencies started to pop up. She'd tell me she was going to a friend's house, but I'd hear background noise on the phone that didn't match up. Or she'd come home later than she said, with no real explanation. It was like living in a fog. I couldn't see clearly, but I knew something was lurking just beyond my sight, waiting to reveal itself. Then came the night everything changed. Lauren had gone out again, this time saying she was meeting up with her old college friends for dinner. I didn't think much of it at first. She had mentioned those friends before, and I even remembered meeting them once. But when she got back home late, way past what should have been a normal dinner, she seemed frazzled. She barely spoke to me, went straight to the bedroom, and shut the door. Something was off and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided I needed to do something drastic. I couldn't go on like this, second-guessing every move she made, wondering if she was hiding something from me. So, I did the one thing I had promised myself I wouldn't do. I installed a tracking app on her phone. I hated the idea of spying on her, but I needed to know the truth. I couldn't confront her with nothing but gut feelings and vague suspicions. For the next week, I tracked her movements. Most of the time, everything seemed normal. She'd go to work, run errands, meet up with friends, all things she had told me about. I started to feel guilty, thinking maybe I was overreacting, letting my paranoia get the better of me. But then, one Thursday night, something strange happened. Lauren told me she had a work meeting in the evening and that it might run late. She left the house around 7 p.m., dressed in one of her more casual outfits. Nothing about it raised any red flags. I went about my evening as usual, trying to shake off the lingering doubt. But as the hours passed and I watched her location on the tracking app, something caught my attention. Her dot on the map wasn't moving toward her office. In fact, it wasn't heading toward any place I recognized. Instead, she was driving across town, toward a part of the city where we rarely went. My heart started racing. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe just a last-minute change of plans, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She eventually stopped at a location just outside the city, an unfamiliar address I didn't recognize. It was a restaurant, according to the app, but not one she had ever mentioned. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it, my hands shaking as I debated what to do next. Should I confront her now? Should I wait? Instead of rushing to judgment, I decided to drive over there myself. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The drive felt like it took forever, though it was only about 20 minutes. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she really was just meeting a friend. Maybe I was overthinking everything. But when I arrived, I parked my car a few spots down from the restaurant and waited. I didn't go inside, not yet. I just sat there, heart pounding, watching the entrance. After what felt like an eternity, I saw her. Lauren walked out of the restaurant, laughing and talking with someone beside her. My heart dropped into my stomach as I realized who it was. It wasn't a friend from work. It wasn't a colleague. It was a man I didn't recognize. They walked toward his car, talking in hushed tones, and before I could process what was happening, she leaned in and kissed him. I felt the blood drain from my face. The scene in front of me didn't feel real. It was like watching a bad movie unfold in slow motion. The woman I had been married to for 7 years was standing there, kissing another man, right in front of me. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I sat there, frozen in my car, watching them, I noticed something else. Something that didn't make sense at first but quickly became clear. The man she was with wasn't just some random guy. He was someone I should have recognized sooner. Because that man was my father. The shock hit me like a freight train. I sat in my car, unable to move, my mind struggling to piece together what I had just witnessed. My wife, my father, together, kissing. It was like my brain refused to process it, like it was too much for my mind to comprehend. How could this be happening? My father, the man who had raised me, who had been there for me my whole life, he was the one Lauren was cheating with? I wanted to storm out of the car, to scream at both of them, to make a scene, but I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to move. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, but my body was frozen in place. Part of me hoped I was hallucinating, that this was some sick dream I would wake up from. But it wasn't. This was real. They got into his car, laughing, completely unaware that I was watching. I felt my stomach churn with a mixture of rage and nausea. I watched as they drove off together, heading in the direction of my father's house. The drive back home was a blur. I don't even remember starting the car or pulling into my driveway. My mind was stuck on that image. Lauren and my father together like it was nothing. My life, my marriage had been a lie. And it wasn't just her. It was him too. The betrayal cut even deeper because of who he was. How long had this been going on? How had I missed it? The questions swirled around in my mind, but I didn't have any answers. When I got home, I sat in the darkness for a long time. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to confront them both, to demand answers, to scream at them for what they had done. But I knew that wasn't the way. Not yet. I needed more than just a confrontation. I needed proof, something concrete that would leave no room for denial or lies. I couldn't just rely on what I saw from a distance. As much as it hurt, I had to be patient. I needed a plan. I spent the next few days pretending everything was normal, which was torture. Lauren acted like nothing was wrong, going about her daily routine, texting me throughout the day like she always did. But every time she smiled at me or kissed me goodbye, I felt sick. I had to fight the urge to scream at her, to call her out for the betrayal that I knew she was hiding. But I bit my tongue. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had the full story. I knew I couldn't do this alone, though. I needed help. So, I called the only person I trusted, my best friend, Jake. He had been my closest friend since high school, the kind of guy who would drop everything if I needed him. We had been through a lot together over the years, and I knew that if anyone could help me through this, it was him. When I told Jake what I had discovered, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Man, I don't even know what to say," he finally replied. "Your wife and your dad? Are you sure?" "Yeah," I said, my voice hollow. "I saw them. I saw it with my own eyes." Jake let out a low whistle. "Dude, that's messed up. I can't even imagine. What are you gonna do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to confront them, but I don't want them to have any way to deny it. I need to catch them in the act. Something undeniable." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Look, if you want proof, we can set something up. Maybe follow them, get some photos. I hate to say it, but if this is happening, you need to be smart about it. Don't give them any room to lie their way out of it." As much as I hated the idea of following my wife and father like some kind of private investigator, I knew Jake was right. I needed to be methodical about this. So we made a plan. The next time Lauren said she was going out, Jake and I would tail her. We'd follow her wherever she went, and if she met up with my father again, we'd get proof. Proof I could use when I finally confronted them. It didn't take long. 2 days later, Lauren told me she was meeting some friends for dinner. I pretended like everything was normal, kissed her goodbye, and watched her drive away. Jake and I were already in position. We followed her car from a distance, weaving through traffic as she made her way across town. Sure enough, she ended up at the same restaurant. I watched from my car as she met up with my father again. This time there was no doubt. They weren't just having dinner. They were acting like a couple. Laughing, touching, completely at ease with each other. I felt the anger bubbling inside me, but I stayed focused. Jake and I snapped a few photos, careful not to be seen. We waited until they left the restaurant and then, just like last time, they drove off together. Only this time, they didn't go back to my father's house. They went to a hotel. I watched in disbelief as they pulled into the parking lot of a small, run-down hotel just outside the city. The neon sign flickered, casting a dim light over the parking lot. It wasn't the kind of place you'd go for a casual meetup. It was discreet, the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen. My stomach churned as I watched them get out of the car. Lauren glanced around nervously, while my father looked calm, too calm. They walked into the hotel together, disappearing behind the door like it was nothing. Like they hadn't just destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and my life. Jake was in the passenger seat, his hands gripping the door handle. "You good, man? You want to go in there?" I shook my head, trying to steady my breathing. "Not yet. I need more. I want to make sure there's no way they can deny it." We sat there in the car for a few minutes, the silence heavy between us. My mind was racing, and I could feel the anger boiling inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let them see me like this. Not until I had everything I needed. Jake nodded, understanding what I was going through. "We wait then. Get what we came for." About 30 minutes later, the door to the hotel swung open. I tensed up, watching as Lauren and my father stepped out, laughing as if they hadn't just committed the ultimate betrayal. They didn't seem to care who saw them, didn't even try to hide it. It was like they were completely comfortable with their dirty secret. That was the moment I knew I had everything I needed. Jake snapped a few more photos, capturing the scene. My father and Lauren walked back to his car, sharing a quick kiss before getting in and driving off. I sat there, numb, watching them disappear into the distance. I couldn't believe this was real. The man who had taught me everything I knew about loyalty and love had been the one to rip my life apart. Jake turned to me, his voice low. "So, what now?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the spot where their car had been, my mind swirling with a mix of rage, betrayal, and heartbreak. There was no going back from this. I had seen enough. I had the proof. But what I didn't have was an answer to the question that had been burning in my mind since the moment I saw them together. Why? Why would my father do this to me? Why would Lauren? What had I done to deserve this? I clenched my fists, feeling the anger rise again. "I'm going to confront them," I finally said. "Both of them. And I'm going to make sure they can't lie their way out of it." Jake nodded. "You want me there? I can back you up." I appreciated the offer, but this was something I needed to do on my own. "No, I've got this. I'll handle it." The drive home was eerily calm. I had gone through every emotion imaginable in the past few hours, but now there was only one thing left to do. Confront them and end this. There was no salvaging my marriage, no fixing the damage they had done to my family. All that was left was to confront them with the truth and make them face what they had done. I waited until the next morning to call my father. I needed some time to cool down, to think through what I was going to say. When I finally dialed his number, my hands were steady, and my mind was clear. He answered after the first ring. "Hey son, what's going on?" His voice sounded so normal, like nothing was wrong. The sound of it made my skin crawl. How could he act like this? How could he pretend that everything was fine? "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold. There was a pause on the other end. "Sure. What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "It's about Lauren." There was another pause, longer this time. I could hear him shifting on the other end of the line. "What about her?" "I know," I said quietly. "I know everything. About you. About her. I've seen it." Silence. He didn't try to deny it. He didn't even try to lie. "Meet me at the house," I said. "We'll talk there." I hung up before he could respond. I had no idea what he was thinking, and honestly, I didn't care. I just wanted this conversation to be over. I wanted them both to know that their lies had finally caught up to them. When he arrived at my house later that afternoon, I was ready. I had already texted Lauren to come home from work early, telling her we needed to talk. I wanted them both there, face to face, so they couldn't twist the truth. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to see my father standing there, looking as calm as ever. He tried to give me a smile, but I didn't return it. I just stepped aside and let him in. Lauren arrived a few minutes later. She looked confused, a little nervous, but she didn't suspect what was coming. I could see it in her eyes. She still thought she had gotten away with it. I led them both into the living room, where the air felt thick with tension. They sat down, and I stood in front of them, my heart pounding in my chest. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times, but now that it was here, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump. "I know what's been going on," I said, my voice steady. "I know about the two of you." Lauren's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. My father didn't even try to look surprised. He just sat there, his hands folded in his lap, like he was waiting for the storm to pass. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, showing them the photos. "You've both been lying to me, and now you're going to explain why." The room fell into an eerie silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Lauren stared at the photos on my phone, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She looked at my father, her eyes pleading with him for some sort of support, but he just sat there, unmoving. I had expected them to at least try to deny it, to scramble for excuses, but they didn't. Maybe they knew there was no point. I had caught them, and there was no way out of this. My father finally broke the silence, leaning forward slightly, his voice unervingly calm. "Look, son," he began. Don't call me that," I snapped, cutting him off. "You don't get to call me that after what you've done." Lauren flinched at the sound of my voice, but my father remained unfazed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, his demeanor still far too relaxed for the situation. "You're right. You have every reason to be angry," he said, his tone measured, like he was trying to defuse a bomb. "This wasn't how I wanted things to go. It just happened." "It just happened?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You're sleeping with my wife, and your excuse is that it just happened?" Lauren finally found her voice. "It wasn't planned," she blurted out, her voice shaky. "I never meant for any of this to happen. Just things between us, between you and me, they've been off for a while. And your dad." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me." Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. She had already destroyed everything we had, and there was no going back now. I couldn't believe that she was even trying to justify what she had done. "Tell me the truth," I demanded, looking directly at my father. "How long has this been going on?" He hesitated, glancing at Lauren before answering. "A few months," he admitted, his voice low. I clenched my fists, feeling the anger surge through me like a wave. A few months. They had been sneaking around behind my back for months, lying to my face, pretending that everything was normal while they carried on their affair. "How could you do this?" I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. "You're my father. You're supposed to be someone I look up to, someone I trust. And you betrayed me in the worst possible way." He looked down, finally showing some sign of regret, but it was too little, too late. "I know," he said quietly. "I know I messed up, but I never meant to hurt you." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at his words. "You didn't mean to hurt me? How do you think I'm supposed to feel? You destroyed my marriage, my family, and for what? What could possibly make this worth it?" Lauren, still teary-eyed, tried to speak again. "It's not like that, Then what is it like, Lauren?" I demanded, turning my anger toward her now. "Explain to me how sleeping with my father isn't as bad as it looks." She opened her mouth, but no explanation came. There was nothing she could say that would make any of this better. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. I could see it on her face. She knew there was no way out of this. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The rage was overwhelming, but I didn't want to lose control. Not in front of them. I had come too far to let my emotions take over now. So what now? I asked, my voice cold and flat. You've both lied to me, betrayed me. What's your plan? Were you going to run off together? Or were you just going to keep this going behind my back? Lauren shook her head, her tears falling freely now. No, we weren't going to run off. I don't know what we were doing. It just got out of hand. Out of hand. I repeated, my anger boiling over again. This isn't some mistake you can brush off. This is our lives. You've destroyed everything, and for what? A fling with my father. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands, but I didn't feel any sympathy for her. I had given her everything, trusted her, and this was how she repaid me. And you, I said, turning to my father, you were supposed to be there for me, to have my back. How could you even look me in the eye while you were sneaking around with my wife? He didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at the floor, knowing there was nothing he could say that would make it right. I stood up, my hands shaking with rage. I'm done. I'm done with both of you. Lauren's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Wait, please, we can fix this, she pleaded. I know I messed up, but we can get through this. I love you. I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. No, Lauren, you don't get to say that anymore. You don't love me. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. We're over. She sobbed harder, reaching out for me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said quietly. Don't touch me. I looked at my father one last time, my heart heavy with disappointment. I hope it was worth it, I said bitterly, because you just lost your son. Without another word, I walked out of the house, leaving them both behind. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. All I knew was that my life as I had known it was over. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove off, the weight of the betrayal settling in. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a deep, overwhelming sadness. The people I had trusted most in the world had destroyed me, and now I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life. Driving away from that house felt like I was leaving behind the last 7 years of my life. Every mile I put between myself and them felt heavier, the betrayal sinking deeper into my bones. The roads were dark, the glow of streetlights passing by like a blur. I wasn't sure where I was heading, but I needed to get as far away as possible. I pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of town, parked the car, and just sat there for a while. The silence was deafening. I felt the weight of everything pressed down on me. My mind replayed every moment I had just gone through, but the pain didn't hit the way I expected it to. It was numbing, like my body had shut down the emotional circuits to stop me from completely breaking apart. I took a deep breath and dialed Jake's number. He picked up almost immediately. Hey man, he said cautiously. How'd it go? I leaned my head back against the seat, staring up at the dim lights of the gas station roof. It's over, I said, my voice hollow. I confronted them, Lauren and my dad. It's all true. It's been going on for months. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Jake let out a slow breath. I'm sorry, man. I don't even know what to say. You want to come over? We can talk, or not talk, whatever you need. I appreciated the offer, but right now I just wanted to be alone. Thanks, Jake, but I need some time to process this. I'll let you know if I need anything. All right? Jake said softly. But if you need a place to crash, don't hesitate, okay? You shouldn't be alone going through something like this. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, I know. I'll call you if I need to. After hanging up, I sat there in the car for a while longer, thinking about what my life had just become. My marriage was over. My relationship with my father was ruined. Everything I had worked for, built with Lauren, was shattered. And now I had to pick up the pieces of my life alone. Eventually, I drove to a small motel just outside town. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was cheap and anonymous, which was exactly what I needed. I checked in, got the key to my room, and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling. The exhaustion hit me like a tidal wave. I hadn't realized how much energy I had spent trying to keep myself together during the confrontation. Sleep didn't come easily, though. I kept replaying the scene over and over in my mind. The look of guilt on Lauren's face, the cold detachment in my father's eyes. How had I missed it? How could I have been so blind? The thought of them together, laughing behind my back, sneaking around like I didn't exist, made my stomach turn. I was restless, tossing and turning, trying to escape the thoughts in my head. But they wouldn't go away. My mind kept wandering back to the beginning, to the moments when things between Lauren and me had started to unravel. Were there signs I had ignored? Things I should have seen but didn't want to? It was maddening to think about it, to try and pinpoint the exact moment when everything had gone wrong. At some point during the night, I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. I grabbed it, squinting at the bright screen. It was Lauren. I stared at the message, my chest tightening. She had sent me a long text, pleading with me to come back and talk to her, to give her a chance to explain. She claimed she had made a terrible mistake and that she wanted to fix things. She kept saying she loved me, that she didn't want to lose me. I threw the phone down in disgust. The audacity. How could she even think that there was a way back from this? She had destroyed everything. Her words meant nothing now. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. He'd sent a similarly long text, filled with apologies and regret. He tried to explain that it hadn't started with the intention of hurting me, that he had let things spiral out of control. He claimed he still cared about me and didn't want to lose our relationship over this. I turned the phone off. I couldn't deal with their pathetic attempts to salvage anything from the wreckage. The damage was done, and no amount of apologies would change that. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. The next few days were a blur of going through the motions. I avoided Lauren's calls and texts, ignored my father's messages, and kept my phone off most of the time. I took time off work, telling my boss I had a personal emergency. I didn't go back to the house, and I didn't want to see either of them. I knew I would have to face them again eventually, but I wasn't ready yet. I spent most of my time at the motel, trying to figure out what to do next. Divorce was the obvious first step, but the thought of going through that process made me feel exhausted. I would need a lawyer, I would have to split our assets, and we'd probably fight over who got the house. It was going to be a mess. But as painful as the process was going to be, I knew there was no other option. There was no future with Lauren. Not after what she had done. After a few more days of wallowing, I finally decided to make some moves. I got in touch with a lawyer and started the process of filing for divorce. It was painful, signing those papers, knowing that I was officially ending the marriage we had once cherished. But it was necessary. There was no point in pretending that anything could be salvaged. Once the divorce papers were filed, I sent Lauren a message, letting her know that I was done and that the papers were coming. Her response was immediate, full of more apologies and pleas for forgiveness. But I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses anymore. I had heard enough. As for my father, I hadn't spoken to him since the confrontation. I wasn't sure if I ever would again. He had been the person I looked up to the most, and now I couldn't even look him in the eye. He had torn apart our family for his own selfish desires, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive him for that. In the end, it felt like I had lost everything. My wife, my father, my sense of security and trust. But there was one thing I hadn't lost, myself. And as I sat in that motel room, staring at the divorce papers, I realized that maybe this was a new beginning. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine. And now I had the chance to rebuild it.